My name is Abigail, and if you had met me a month ago, you would have seen nothing more than a quiet widow learning how to breathe again. Now, I know better. Everything changed the day my daughter-in-law tried to make me sign away my life. It happened on a gray afternoon, the kind that presses against your windows and makes the whole house feel smaller. I was still wearing black. Not because anyone expected me to, but because I wasn't ready to let go of it yet. Grief doesn't leave when the funeral ends. It lingers in the silence, in the empty chair across the table, in the way you still reach for someone who isn't there. My husband, Daniel, had been gone for just over 2 weeks. 42 years of marriage, reduced to a framed photo and a closet full of clothes I couldn't bring myself to touch. I was in the kitchen when Claire walked in. She didn't knock. She never did. "Abigail," she said, her voice smooth, rehearsed. "I brought something for you." She placed a folder on the table like it was nothing, like it didn't matter, like it wasn't about to become the most important document of my life. I remember wiping my hands on a dish towel, buying myself a few seconds before opening it. "What is it?" I asked. "Just paperwork," she said lightly, "to help simplify things." That word, simplify, should have been my first warning. I opened the folder. Pages of legal language stared back at me. Dense. Complicated. Intentionally so. Even in my grief, something in me stirred. You see, before I retired, I worked as a legal assistant for nearly 25 years. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew enough to recognize when something was off. And this was very off. "It's about the house?" I asked slowly. Claire leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me too closely. "Among other things," she replied. "It just makes everything easier for everyone, especially for Mark. My son. She always brought him into it." I flipped another page, scanning quickly. Property transfer. Shared ownership. Immediate execution. Not after my death. Now. Why would this need to be done now? I asked. She sighed, as if I were being difficult. "Abigail, you shouldn't have to deal with all this alone. Mark can take care of things." That's what Daniel would have wanted. That almost broke me, because Daniel had told me exactly what he wanted, just days before he died. I could still see him in that hospital bed, thinner than I'd ever seen him, but with that same steady look in his eyes. "Be careful," he had whispered. At the time, I thought he meant life without him. Loneliness. Bills. The usual fears. Now I knew better. "Which lawyer prepared this?" I asked. Claire hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "A firm Mark found," she said. "Someone more deficient." That was the second warning, because Daniel and I had worked with the same lawyer for decades. A man who knew every detail of our finances, our property, our wishes. And he had said nothing about this. "I think I should have it reviewed," I said, keeping my voice calm. Claire's smile tightened. "There's nothing to review," she replied. "It's standard. You'll just confuse yourself." There it was. Pressure. Subtle, but very real. She walked closer, lowering her voice like we were sharing a secret. "You trust Mark, don't you?" she said softly. "Or do you want to make things harder for him right now?" I felt that one, because despite everything, I loved my son. Even if he had been distant, even if his visits had become rare, his calls shorter, his attention divided, even if, somewhere along the way, I had started feeling like a guest in his life. I looked back down at the document, then at the pen she was already holding out to me. "Just sign," she said gently. "It's for your own good." Those words, I will never forget them, because in that moment, something inside me shifted. Grief didn't disappear, but it stepped aside, and clarity took its place. I reached for the pen. Claire relaxed immediately. I saw it in her shoulders, in the way her lips curved ever so slightly. She thought she had already won. What she didn't know was that Daniel had prepared me. 3 days before he passed, we had signed something together. Not a will that had been done long ago. This was different. A safeguard. A quiet, careful trap. The paper Claire placed in front of me wasn't the one I signed. Instead, I signed the document hidden beneath it, the one Daniel had insisted I keep close. A notarized statement, declaring that any attempt to pressure me into transferring my assets would be considered coercion, and that I was fully aware of what was happening. I signed slowly,
Carefully.
then I slid the paper back to her. There, I said softly. Claire didn't even check. She took it with a satisfied smile, slipping it into her folder like it was already hers. You've done the right thing, she said. I nodded, lowering my eyes like a grieving widow who didn't understand what she'd just agreed to. But inside, I was wide awake. After she left, I didn't move for a long time. The house was silent again. Too silent. I sat down at the kitchen table and let the tears come, not because I was afraid, but because something had finally become undeniable. I hadn't just lost my husband. I had lost the illusion of my family.
And yet,
Through the grief, through the betrayal, one thought stayed steady in my mind. Daniel knew. He had seen this coming, and he had trusted me to handle it. I wiped my tears and looked toward the bookshelf in the corner of the kitchen. To anyone else, it looked ordinary.
cookbooks.
Old recipes. A few decorative items. But hidden between them was something else. Something Daniel had installed months ago. Quietly.
Carefully. A camera.
And if it had been recording, then Claire had just made a very serious mistake. I folded my hands on the table and took a slow breath. The game has started, I whispered into the empty room. And this time, I was ready. If you had asked me years ago when everything started to fall apart, I would have said it was the day my husband died. But that would have been wrong. The truth is, the fracture in our family began long before that. It just took Daniel's absence for the cracks to become impossible to ignore. I still remember the first time I met Claire. It was early spring, the kind of day where the air feels new and everything seems full of promise. Mark had called the night before, his voice unusually bright, almost boyish. Mom, I want you to meet someone, he said. She's important. That word lingered with me. Important. Not kind, not wonderful, important. Daniel had raised an eyebrow when I repeated it to him, but we didn't question it. We were just happy our son had found someone he cared about. They arrived together that Sunday, and I knew something was different the moment I opened the door. Mark stood a little straighter, spoke a little differently, like he was performing a version of himself. And Claire, she walked in like she was evaluating the place, not visiting it. Her eyes moved quickly, taking in the furniture, the layout, the details. What a charming house, she said, smiling politely. It must be worth quite a bit by now. That was the first thing she said. Not hello. Not nice to meet you.
That.
Daniel noticed it too. I saw it in the way he glanced at me across the table later that afternoon. That silent look we had perfected over decades. Something isn't right. But Mark was happy, at least he seemed to be. He laughed more than usual, touched her arm constantly, watched her face, as if waiting for approval before finishing his own sentences. It was subtle, almost invisible if you weren't looking for it. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Things moved quickly after that. Too quickly. Within 6 months, they were engaged. The wedding was extravagant, far beyond what Mark could realistically afford. When Daniel offered to help, Claire refused on his behalf. We prefer to handle things ourselves, she said, her tone polite but firm. Later, I overheard her in the hallway speaking to Mark. Why take their money now, she whispered, when everything will be yours eventually? I remember standing there, frozen, realizing that what I had dismissed as bluntness was something far colder. The first year of their marriage wasn't terrible. Mark still visited, still called, still felt like our son. But even then there were changes. Conversations became shorter. He started checking his phone during dinner. Sometimes he would pause mid-sentence, glance at Claire, and then rephrase what he had been about to say. It was small, almost insignificant, but it was constant, like water slowly wearing down stone. By the second year, the distance was undeniable. Visits became occasional. Phone calls turned into obligations. When we did see him, Claire was almost always there, guiding the conversation, redirecting topics, subtly controlling the atmosphere. She had a way of smiling while shutting something down, of making it seem like everything was fine while quietly taking over. Daniel tried to stay optimistic. "He's building his own life," he would say. "That's normal." But I could see it hurt him. Mark had always been close to us. Thoughtful. Gentle. The kind of son who remembered birthdays without reminders and called just to check in. That version of him didn't disappear overnight, but it was fading. The real turning point came 3 years into their marriage. They showed up one evening unannounced, which in itself was unusual. Claire did most of the talking. "We're considering an investment opportunity," she explained, settling into our living room like she owned it. "But we need some temporary financial support." Daniel asked questions, reasonable ones. Details.
Plans.
Risks. Claire's smile never wavered, but something sharp appeared beneath it. "We're not asking for advice," she said. "We're asking for support." Daniel refused to hand over money without understanding where it was going. It wasn't a harsh refusal, just careful, responsible. But Claire didn't take it well. That was the first time I saw her mask slip completely. Just for a second. Cold. Calculating. Angry. After that, things changed quickly. Mark pulled away even more. When we spoke, it felt rehearsed. Like he was choosing his words carefully, avoiding certain topics. Visits almost stopped entirely. When Daniel tried to reach out, Mark always had a reason: work, travel, stress. And Claire was always somewhere in the background, even when she wasn't physically there. Then came the pregnancy. When Mark told us they were expecting, it felt like a miracle. A second chance. A way back to each other. For a while it worked. Claire softened, or at least pretended to. She allowed more visits. Mark came by more often, sometimes even alone. We prepared a room for the baby, filled it with everything we thought our grandchild might need. It felt like rebuilding something that had been broken. Their daughter, Lily, was born in winter. She was perfect. Tiny, quiet, with Mark's eyes. Holding her for the first time, I can't even describe it. For a brief moment, everything felt right again. Like the past few years had just been a misunderstanding.
But it didn't last.
The visit slowed again, then stopped. Claire had rules, schedules, concerns, germs, boundaries. There was always a reason why we couldn't see Lily as often as we wanted. Mark apologized every time, but the distance remained. The room we had prepared stayed untouched. Toys unopened, blankets unused. And then Daniel got sick. Stage 4 cancer.
Sudden.
Aggressive. Final. Everything changed again, but not in the way I had hoped. Claire became attentive. Very attentive. She visited more. Asked questions. Not about Daniel's comfort, but about our finances. Our will. Our accounts. Our house. Always the house. "You should think about getting things in order," she said just weeks after the diagnosis. For Mark's sake. For Lily's future. Daniel looked at her in a way I had never seen before. Calm but final. "Everything is already in order," he said. What she didn't realize was how true that was. As Daniel's condition worsened, Claire's behavior became harder to ignore. She would find excuses to separate me from him during visits. Ask me questions in private. Push gently, then more firmly. One afternoon, I came home from the hospital and found her in Daniel's study, a drawer open. "I was just looking for paper," she said quickly. Daniel knew immediately what she had been doing. "She's searching for the will," he told me later, his voice steady despite everything. That was the night he made the call. The next morning, he insisted on getting dressed.
Properly.
Not like a patient, but like himself. We went to see his lawyer. And that was when the plan was created. Not out of anger. Not out of revenge. But out of protection. "I don't want to punish Mark," Daniel said. "But I won't let her destroy what we built." What they designed was precise. Careful. Almost invisible unless triggered. A safeguard that would only activate if Claire revealed exactly who she truly was. And now, she already had. Back in the present, sitting alone in my kitchen after she left with that signed document, I understood something clearly for the first time. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. And Claire believed she was already in control. I stood up slowly and walked toward the bookshelf again, my eyes resting on the place where Daniel's hidden camera sat, disguised among old cookbooks. If it had captured everything, and I was certain it had, then Claire hadn't just tried to manipulate me. She had documented her own downfall. I allowed myself a small, quiet breath. The will reading was in 2 days. 2 days for her to feel safe. 2 days for her to believe she had already won. And then, everything would change. The morning of the will reading arrived with a strange kind of calm, the kind that doesn't come from peace, but from certainty. I woke up before sunrise, not because I had slept well. Sleep had become something shallow and unreliable, but because my mind refused to rest any longer. For a few moments, I lay still, staring at the ceiling, letting the silence settle around me. It was the same silence that had followed me since Daniel's last breath, but today it felt different. He wasn't just gone. He had left something behind. A plan. A final act of protection. I got out of bed slowly, my body still carrying the weight of grief, but my thoughts sharper than they had been in weeks. I chose my clothes carefully, not out of vanity, but intention. A simple dark dress, modest, appropriate, the kind that would make me look exactly what Claire expected. Fragile, grieving, harmless. I tied my hair back, left my face almost untouched, just enough to avoid looking completely worn down. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw what she saw. An old woman trying to hold herself together. And that was exactly what I needed her to believe. But beneath that image, there was something else now. Awareness. Control. I made tea, but didn't drink it. My hands needed something to do, something steady. The clock ticked loudly on the wall, each second marking the approach of a moment I knew would change everything. At exactly 9, there was a knock at the door.
Mark.
He stood there alone. That surprised me. "Morning, Mom," he said quietly, stepping inside. His voice was softer than usual, uncertain. He looked tired, more than tired. Worn down, like something inside him had been pulling in opposite directions for too long. "Where's Claire?" I asked. "She'll meet us there," he replied, avoiding my eyes as he took off his jacket. "She had something to take care of."
Of course she did.
Claire always arrived separately when she wanted control of the situation. It gave her an entrance, a moment, an advantage. We drove in silence at first. I watched him from the corner of my eye, trying to find the boy he used to be in the man sitting beside me. He was still there. I could see it in the way his fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel, in the hesitation before he spoke. "Mom," he said finally, "whatever happens today, I just want things to be simple." Simple. That word again. I almost smiled, but I kept my expression neutral. "Life is rarely simple, Mark," I said gently. He didn't respond. When we arrived at the office, Claire was already there, standing outside like she had been waiting for us, perfectly composed. Her outfit was elegant but understated, carefully chosen to appear respectful, not opportunistic. But I saw it, the flicker in her eyes, the anticipation she couldn't fully hide. "Abigail," she said warmly, stepping forward and lightly touching my arm. "How are you holding up?" "Doing my best," I replied. She nodded sympathetically, then glanced briefly at Mark before leading the way inside, as if she already belonged there. The office felt familiar. Too familiar. Daniel and I had sat in that same room so many times over the years, planning, organizing, building something stable and secure. Now I was there alone, but not unprepared. The lawyer greeted us with a calm professionalism that immediately steadied the room. He had known Daniel for decades. He knew everything. And more importantly, he knew the plan. We sat down. Claire positioned herself slightly forward in her chair, close enough to the table to appear engaged, but not desperate. Mark sat beside me, quiet, tense. I placed my hand in my lap, letting them rest there as if I needed the support. The reading began. At first, everything was exactly as expected. Formal language. Standard structure. The house was left to me for my lifetime. Assets allocated carefully. Provisions made for Mark and Lily in the future. Nothing unusual. Nothing alarming. I didn't look at Claire, but I didn't need to. I could feel her relaxing. This was going exactly the way she had hoped. Then came the shift. Additionally, the lawyer continued, turning a page, there are specific conditions attached to the inheritance, as outlined by Daniel prior to his passing. That was the moment. I saw it immediately. Claire's posture changed, not dramatically, but enough. A slight tightening. A small shift forward. Attention sharpened. Before we proceed, she interrupted smoothly, reaching into her bag. I believe this might be relevant. She placed the document on the table, the one I had signed. Mark frowned. What is that? It's something your mother and I discussed yesterday, Claire said calmly. A way to simplify ownership of the house moving forward. I lowered my gaze, letting hesitation show. I'm not sure I understood everything, I said softly. Claire smiled reassuringly. You don't need to worry about that now. The lawyer picked up the document, his expression unreadable as he scanned it. A few seconds passed. Then he set it down very carefully. This, he said slowly, is a transfer document. Mark turned to me. You signed this. I hesitated. Just enough. Claire said it would help, I replied. Silence filled the room. Then the lawyer spoke again, his tone firmer now. I'm afraid this introduces a serious issue. Claire's expression didn't change, but I saw it. The smallest flicker of tension. What kind of issue? She asked. He opened another document. The will contains a clause specifically addressing situations like this. And then he read it. Clear. Precise. Unavoidable. Any attempt to pressure, manipulate, or influence Abigail into transferring her assets would trigger an immediate change in the structure of the inheritance. I watched Claire carefully. At first, confusion. Then disbelief. Then something sharper. What does that mean? She asked, her voice still controlled but tighter now. It means, the lawyer replied, reaching for a sealed envelope, that Daniel anticipated the possibility of coercion. He opened it, and everything changed. As he read the contents aloud, the room seemed to shrink around us. The inheritance structure shifted completely. Mark's access, restricted. Lily's share, protected. Control placed in my hands. Not as punishment. As protection. Mark looked stunned. Dad did this? Yes, the lawyer said calmly. Claire stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. She agreed to this transfer willingly. And that was her mistake. The lawyer reached for a small device and pressed a button. Her voice filled the room. Clear. Undeniable. Persuasive. Pressuring. Guiding me towards signing something I didn't understand. Then my voice followed. Hesitant. Uncertain. Vulnerable. Exactly as it had happened. Exactly as it needed to be. The recording stopped. Silence. Mark looked at Claire, not with confusion this time, but with something far more dangerous. Recognition. Claire, he said quietly. She shook her head immediately. This is being twisted. She knew what she was signing. No, I said. And for the first time, my voice was steady. I knew exactly what I was signing. All eyes turned to me. I lifted my head, meeting Claire's gaze directly. The question is, I continued, did you? The room held its breath. And, in that moment, the illusion shattered. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I had experienced in the past few weeks, heavier even than grief. It wasn't empty, it was full. Full of truth, of realization, of everything that had been ignored for years finally rising to the surface, where no one could push it back down again. I didn't move. I didn't rush to fill it. Silence, I had learned, can be more powerful than any argument. Mark was the first to break. He leaned back slowly, his eyes still fixed on Claire, but it was no longer the look of a man trying to understand. It was the look of someone who finally did. "Is it true?" he asked quietly. Claire let out a sharp breath, as if offended by the question itself. "Of course not. This is being manipulated. You're seriously going to believe a recording taken out of context?" But there was no confidence behind her words now. No smooth control. Just urgency. The kind that comes when someone realizes they're losing. Mark didn't answer right away. He looked at the document again, then at the lawyer, then at me. I could see the conflict inside him. The years of influence, of subtle redirection, clashing with something deeper, something older. The boy we raised. The man he had been before all of this. "I heard it," he said finally. "We all did." Claire stepped closer to him, lowering her voice, trying to pull him back into her orbit. "Mark, think about this. Your mother is confused. She's grieving. People can be influenced. I'm not confused. That was me." And the moment I spoke, something shifted again. I straightened slightly in my chair, letting the last traces of hesitation fall away. I didn't need to pretend anymore.
Not now.
Claire turned toward me slowly, her eyes narrowing. "You expect us to believe you planned this?" she said. "Yes," I replied calmly. She laughed, but it wasn't genuine. It was sharp, brittle. "That's ridiculous." "No," I said. "What's ridiculous is that you never once stopped to consider that I might understand exactly what you were doing." That hit. I saw it land. Because people like Claire rely on one thing above all else: underestimation. They build their control on the assumption that others are weaker, slower, easier to manipulate. And the moment that assumption breaks, everything they've built starts to collapse. "You think this makes you clever?" she snapped. "You tricked me." "No," I said quietly. "I gave you an opportunity." The room went still again. "You chose what to do with it." Mark ran a hand over his face, his breathing uneven now. "Claire, why would you do this?" he asked, and there was something raw in his voice. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to disappointment. To hurt. She turned back to him immediately, switching tactics without hesitation. "I did it for us," she said, softer now, almost pleading. "For our future. For stability. You know how complicated these things can get. I was just trying to make sure everything was handled properly." "By going behind my back?" he asked. "I wasn't." "You didn't tell me," he cut in. "You didn't tell me you went to Mom with legal documents. You didn't tell me you asked her to sign anything." Claire hesitated, and that hesitation said more than anything else could have. "I didn't think it was necessary," she said finally. Mark let out a short, hollow laugh. "Not necessary," he repeated. I watched him carefully. This was the moment that mattered most. Not the legal outcome, not the documents, not the plan. This. The point where he decided who he believed. Not with words, but with understanding. The lawyer remained silent, allowing it to unfold.
He didn't need to intervene.
The evidence had already done its work. Claire, realizing she was losing ground, turned again, this time toward him. "You can't seriously allow this," she said. "This clause, it's extreme. It's unreasonable. She's elderly. She's vulnerable. And now suddenly she's orchestrating legal traps." He met her gaze calmly. "What's unreasonable," he said, "is trying to take control of something that isn't yours." Her expression hardened instantly. "There it is," she said coldly. "That's what this is really about. You think I'm after money." Mark didn't hesitate this time. "Aren't you?" The question hung in the air, like a blade. Claire didn't answer, because she didn't have one that would work anymore. I leaned forward slightly, folding my hands together on the table. "This was never about money," I said quietly. "It was about protection." She turned to me sharply. "Protection from what?" "From you."
No anger.
No raised voice. Just truth. And sometimes, That's the most devastating thing you can say. Claire shook her head, stepping back as if distancing herself from all of it. This is insane, she muttered. All of it. You've turned him against me. I didn't have to, I said. Mark stood up then, slowly, like the weight of the moment had finally settled on him. I need some air, he said, his voice low. He didn't look at either of us as he walked out. The door closed behind him, and suddenly it was just the three of us. Claire exhaled sharply, pacing once across the room before turning back. The mask was gone now.
Completely.
No more softness. No more careful words. You think you've won, she said. I didn't respond, because winning wasn't what this felt like. You've humiliated me, she continued. In front of him. In front of everyone. No, I said. You did that yourself. Her eyes flashed. You're going to regret this, she said quietly. There it was. Not frustration. Not anger. A threat. But even that didn't have the effect she expected, because I wasn't afraid of her anymore. Daniel saw you clearly, I said, holding her gaze. Long before I did. That stopped her. Just for a second. And in that second, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not calculation. Not control.
Fear.
You should have listened to him, I added. The lawyer finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. At this point, the terms of the will are in effect. The trust structure will proceed as outlined. There is nothing further to discuss here today. Claire let out a bitter laugh. Oh, there's plenty to discuss, she said. This isn't over. No, I said quietly. It is. She stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to find something, weakness, doubt, anything she could still use. But there was nothing left to take. Finally, she turned and walked out without another word. The door closed behind her. And just like that, it was over. Or, at least, that part of it was. I sat back slowly, the tension leaving my body all at once. Not relief. Not yet. Something else. Something quieter. The end of something old. The beginning of something uncertain. The lawyer gathered the documents, giving me a measured look. You handled that well, he said. I nodded faintly. Daniel handled it, I replied. He allowed himself a small smile. He always did think ahead. Yes, I said softly. He did. Outside, I could see Mark through the window, standing alone, staring into the distance. For the first time in years, he wasn't being guided. He wasn't being influenced. He was thinking, and whatever came next would be his choice. The weeks after the reading didn't explode the way I expected. There was no dramatic confrontation at my door, no immediate legal battle, no shouting matches that tore everything apart in a single moment. Instead, what followed was slower, quieter, and in many ways, far more difficult. Because when the truth finally comes out, it doesn't just destroy what was false. It leaves you standing in the wreckage, trying to understand what's real. Mark didn't come by that evening. He didn't call either. At first, I told myself he just needed time. Anyone would. The foundation of his life had just shifted beneath him, and no matter how obvious things might seem from the outside, accepting them is something else entirely. It's one thing to hear the truth. It's another to rebuild your world around it. Still, the silence lingered longer than I expected. 3 days passed, then 5. On the 6th day, I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't rush to the window. I didn't need to. I knew it was him. There's something about a mother's instinct that doesn't fade, no matter how much distance grows between you. When I opened the door, Mark was already standing there. He looked different, not physically, but in a way that's harder to describe. Like something inside him had been stripped away. Or maybe uncovered. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped aside. He walked in slowly, looking around the house like he was seeing it for the first time in years. His eyes lingered on small things, the photographs, the furniture, the little details that had always been there but had stopped meaning anything to him. I forgot how quiet it is here, he said. It's always been quiet, I replied. He nodded, but didn't answer. We sat in the kitchen, the same place where so many conversations had happened before everything changed. For a while, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was necessary. I moved out, he said finally. I looked at him, waiting. I'm staying at a short-term rental, he continued. Just for now. For now, I repeated gently. He rubbed his hands together, a nervous habit I hadn't seen since he was younger. She says I overreacted, he added. That everything was blown out of proportion. I didn't interrupt. She says you set her up, he went on. That the whole thing was planned to make her look bad. And what do you think? I asked. He let out a slow breath. I think, he paused, searching for the words. I think I've been ignoring things for a long time. That was the first real step. Not anger, not blame, recognition. I kept telling myself it was normal, he said. That relationships change, that priorities shift, that people grow apart from their parents. I thought that's what was happening. He looked down at his hands. But it wasn't just that, was it? No, I said quietly. He nodded like he already knew. She made it seem like everything was about independence, he continued. About building our own life. And I believed that. I wanted to believe that. He laughed softly, without humor. It's easier than admitting you're being pushed. I watched him carefully, seeing pieces of the past fall into place. She didn't do it all at once, he said. It was gradual. Small things. Comments. Suggestions. Making me question things I never used to question. Making me feel like I had to choose. That's how it works, I said. He looked up at me, surprised. You knew.
I suspected, I answered.
But I couldn't force you to see it. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. I feel like I wasted years, he said. Like I was somewhere else. You were where you thought you needed to be, I said. That's not the same as being lost forever. He didn't respond right away. She wants me to come back, he said after a moment. She says we can fix it. And do you believe that? He shook his head slowly. No, he admitted. I don't think this is something that can be fixed. That was the second step. Acceptance. Not of the situation, but of reality. What about Lily? I asked gently. His expression softened immediately.
She's with me, he said. For now.
Claire's not happy about that. I imagine she isn't. He gave a small, tired smile. That's an understatement. We sat in silence again, but this time it felt different. Less heavy. More grounded. I read the documents, he said eventually. All of them.
The trust.
The conditions. Everything. I nodded. At first I was angry, he admitted. I thought Dad didn't trust me. I waited. But now, he paused, looking around the kitchen again. Now I think he was protecting me. He was, I said. Mark nodded slowly. From her, he added. And maybe from myself, too. That was the third step. Understanding. And once that begins, there's no going back. I don't want the money right now, he said suddenly. I looked at him. I mean it, he continued. I don't need it. I have work. I can manage. I don't want all of that to define what happens next. That's your decision, I said. He met my eyes. I know. And I want the trust to stay exactly the way it is. I felt something shift inside me. Not relief, not exactly, but something close.
Bride.
Not in the situation, but in the person he was becoming again. Your father would understand that, I said. He smiled faintly. I think he would. We talked longer than we had in years that day. Not about the past in detail, not about blame or regret, but about what comes next. About rebuilding something that had been neglected, not destroyed. Later, as he stood to leave, he hesitated near the door. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't let him continue. You're here now, I replied. That's what matters. He nodded, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something familiar in his eyes. Not confusion. not conflict.
Clarity.
After he left, the house felt different again. Still quiet, but not empty. Because for the first time since Daniel passed, I wasn't just holding on to what was lost. I was beginning to see what remained, and what could still be rebuilt. I walked into the living room and sat down in Daniel's chair, letting my hand rest on the armrest where his had been so many times before. "You were right," I said softly. "Not just about Claire. About everything. This hadn't been about revenge. It hadn't even been about justice. It had been about giving Mark the chance to see clearly. And now, he finally could. But the story wasn't over yet. Because Claire wasn't the kind of person who walked away quietly. And something told me she wasn't done. If there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that some endings don't arrive all at once. They unfold slowly, like a storm that doesn't crash, but lingers, shifts, and finally clears the skies so completely you almost forget how heavy the air once felt. Claire didn't disappear after that day. People like her don't vanish quietly. They resist, they push, they try to reclaim what they believe is theirs. But what she didn't understand, what she never understood, was that control only works when people don't see it. And now, everything was visible. The first real move came about 2 weeks after Mark left her. I received a letter. Not emotional. Not personal. Legal. Claire was challenging the will. Of course she was. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope still open in front of me, reading the same lines twice, then a third time. Claims of manipulation. Questions about my mental state. Suggestions that I had been influenced, pressured, even misled. It would have been insulting if it hadn't been so predictable. Daniel had prepared for this too. I called the lawyer that same afternoon. He wasn't surprised. "We expected this," he said calmly. "Everything is documented. The recording, the signed statement, the timeline, it all supports your position. She can challenge it, but she won't win." "I'm not worried about winning," I replied. And that was true. This wasn't about proving something anymore. It was about closing the door properly. Still, the process began. Meetings. Paperwork. Statements. Claire pushed hard at first, trying to create doubt where there was none. But without Mark fully supporting her, and he didn't, her arguments began to collapse quickly. Evidence has a way of doing that. It doesn't argue. It doesn't shout. It just exists. Mark testified once. He didn't say much, but what he said mattered. That he hadn't known about the document. That he hadn't approved it. That he had concerns about how it had been presented. He didn't attack her. He didn't defend her either. He just told the truth. And sometimes, that's the most powerful thing anyone can do. The challenge didn't last long after that. Claire withdrew it. Not because she accepted defeat, but because she recognized it. And when she realized she couldn't win legally, she tried something else. She came to see me. I wasn't expecting it, but I wasn't surprised either. It was late afternoon when I heard the knock. I knew it was her before I opened the door. There was a certain rhythm to it. Controlled. Intentional. When I opened it, she stood there exactly as I remembered, composed, perfectly put together, but with something different beneath the surface. Less confidence. More urgency. "Abigail," she said. I didn't invite her in immediately. "What do you want?" I asked. She hesitated, not long, but enough. "I think we should talk," she said. "We already did." "That wasn't a conversation," she replied. "That was the situation." I studied her for a moment. Then I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, looking around the house like she had the first time she ever entered it. But this time, there was no quiet calculation in her eyes. Just assessment. Distance. We sat in the living room. Neither of us spoke right away. "I withdrew the challenge," she said finally. "I know. I could have continued," she added. "You wouldn't have won." She didn't argue with that. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her voice softer now, more measured. "This doesn't have to end like this," she said. I almost smiled. "It already has," I replied. "No," she said, shaking her head. "It doesn't. Mark is confused right now. He's emotional.
You know how he is.
He'll come back around. There it was. Not an apology. Not accountability. A strategy. He's not confused, I said. He's finally clear. She exhaled sharply, frustration breaking through for just a second. You've turned him against me. No, I said calmly. You did that. Silence stretched between us again. Then she changed tactics. What do you want? She asked. The question hung in the air. It was the first honest one she had asked. And it took me a moment to answer, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted to be sure I said it clearly. I want peace, I said. She frowned slightly.
Peace.
Yes. That's it. That's everything. She leaned back, studying me like she was trying to understand something unfamiliar. You're willing to throw away your family for that? She asked. I met her gaze steadily. I'm not the one who threw anything away. That landed. Harder than anything else I had said. Because deep down, she knew it was true. For a moment, I thought she might argue again.
Push.
Try to regain control of the conversation. But instead, something else happened. She went quiet. Not calculating. Not planning. Just quiet. I never thought you'd fight back, she said after a while. I didn't, I replied. She looked at me, confused. I protected what mattered. I continued. There's a difference. She held my gaze for a long second. Then she stood up. So this is it, she said. Yes, I answered. She nodded slowly, like she was finally accepting something, not emotionally, but logically, like a conclusion she couldn't avoid anymore.
When she reached the door, she paused.
I hope it was worth it, she said without turning around. I didn't answer, because I didn't need to. After she left, I stood there for a while, listening to the quiet settle back into the house. And this time, it felt different. Not heavy, not empty, just still. Weeks passed, then months. Life didn't suddenly become perfect, but it became real again. Mark visited often, not out of obligation but choice. We talked. Sometimes about important things, sometimes about nothing at all. The distance between us didn't disappear overnight, but it stopped growing. And that mattered. Lily came with him. At first, she was shy around me, unsure, unfamiliar. But children don't hold on to distance the way adults do. They adjust. They reconnect. They trust again if you give them space. One evening, she sat beside me on the couch, holding my hand like it had always belonged there. Daddy says Grandpa can see us, she said. I smiled softly. I think he can, I replied. Do you think he's happy? She asked. I looked around the room. The house Daniel had built, the life we had shared, the family that had almost been lost but somehow found its way back. Yes, I said. I think he is. Later that night, after they had gone to bed, I sat alone for a while, just like I used to. But the silence didn't feel the same anymore, because I wasn't alone in it. I had memories. I had truth. I had something real again. I looked toward Daniel's photograph on the shelf, the same quiet smile he had worn for as long as I had known him. You were right, I said softly. Not just about Claire. About everything. About patience. About strength. About knowing when to stand still and when to act. His final plan hadn't just protected me. It had given us a second chance. Not to go back, but to move forward. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.